So I'm Mari Reynolds. I'm from Ask Resource Center, and this is Judy Russell from Drake Head Start. And so thanks everybody for coming to this session. I am not intimidated around the IFSP and the IEP process. This session is brought to you by the Iowa Department of Education. It's sponsored by the Iowa Department of Education. And so I just was going to tell you a little bit about Judy. She has been at Drake Head Start for, well, actually I don't have that information.
3.5 years.
3.5 years now. And they have a number of different sites around Des Moines and the surrounding communities with Drake Head Start. And so some of you may be familiar with some of their programs. And so Judy's actually originally from Arizona, I believe, or lived there for quite a while.
Long time.
And so she has been with the Iowa Department of Education in the Early Childhood Division for a number of years.
Yeah,
there,
6 years.
So now she's with Drake Head Start, and we're really glad to have her here today to present to you on how to not be intimidated by the IEP and IFSP process. So thank you, everyone. Could you please welcome Judy? Thank you.
Oh. Thank you, everybody. We are going to talk about not being intimidated. I was a classroom teacher. I was a counselor, and part of my counseling program was to work with kids that typically were adopted and had a lot of behavioral issues, and working with families and the child and the school. So even though I might have been a little renegade for the school district. So this is my class. This was probably 20 years ago. I'm in the middle, 20 years. I haven't aged much, and my hair is still exactly the same color. I don't know how that happens. But these were my students 20 years ago, and I think of every one of them, and it just warms my heart, because I am a special educator, always. So that's who I am. 3 objectives today. You're going to understand your role in the special education process if you want special education law and the real details. Dee Gethman and Betsy Lynn are presenting all about transition from IFSP to an IEP or Part C to Part B this afternoon. I did steal a few of their slides, but if you want to know more about the IEP process or the IFSP process, go visit with them this afternoon, because we're going to talk about the strategies that you need to have to be an active member of the IEP team, and then come up with an action plan so that you can be proactive for your child and as you're working with the school district. Okay, so thinking about a parent, especially a parent that has a child with special needs. I was trying to think of a word that described you. And the word that came to my mind was dauntless. And then I tried to Google pictures of Dauntless, and it's just that goofy movie. So I thought, okay, well, let's talk about other words that dauntless means. Dauntless means to show fearlessness and determination, and you know you do that every day. Other words are determined, resolute, indomitable, intrepid, plucky, I love that, plucky, spirited, unflinching, unshrinking, bold, valiant, brave, and courageous. Courageous. Say that 3 times. Those are what you are. Those are the characteristics that you hold on to, because every day you have to be an advocate for your child. Every parent does, for all of our children, but especially children with special needs. Okay, so you have to make sure that you keep your focus. So on your tables, you have markers and you have plain pieces of paper. So open up the box of markers, and there's plain pieces of paper, so take a piece of paper. So I want you to think about, who is your child? When you go to an IEP meeting, who is your child? So close your eyes and think about your child. What does your child look like when they're mad, when they're happy, when they're sad, anxious, delighted, sleeping, I always like to think of my daughter, my grandchildren, and my dogs as sleeping because they're so sweet and so precious. How your child eats, and then how are they when they're focused? Because every child focuses, even if it's just a small bit of time. So picture that in your brain. Picture what your child looks like. Now think about the sounds. Think about the sounds when your child is giggling or laughing or crying or sleeping, because we all make sounds when we sleep. My husband would say no. How your child talks. Hear your child sing or hum. Hear the sounds of your child playing. This is your child. This is the child that you will always have to carry the flag for, will always have to carry the torch for. So now take a marker and draw a picture of your child. Doesn't have to look like a child. Just draw a picture. Use colors. But remember that feeling. Hold on to that feeling of that giggle and that laugh, the hum, when your child is absolutely delighted. We all do things when we're delighted. We smile, we do something with our hands, we jump up and down. Think about that. Think about your child and how they look and what they sound like. And think about how you feel. It doesn't have to be perfect. This is who your child is. This is what I always refer to as the golden child. Every child that I ever taught, every child that I ever consulted with or parent consulted with in a school district, at home, every child has a golden child inside of them. No matter what they're doing, there's still that golden child, and you always have to see it. And part of your job is to hold that golden child in your heart and in your head and convey the message of who your child really is to school districts and therapists and teachers. Okay, so I'm going to count down to 10 and you got to be done. Or count down from 10. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So for our purposes today, hold on to that picture. And when you move on and you have another IEP meeting or an IFSP meeting, hold that picture in your head. But I worked for a school district for a long time. And I worked for the Department of Education. And then the director at Head Start opened up at Drake, and it's like, oh my gosh, how could I not want to work with at least people who work with children and families? So we serve 1,016 kids, and in six county areas, most of them in the Des Moines area. And I also get the dubious role of being the disabilities coordinator, because I wasn't going to let anybody else in my agency do that. Because this semester I taught a class at Drake called Characteristics and Assessment of Young Children with Diverse Needs. Now how's that for a title? And my biggest goal for the 7 young women that are in my class that are going to be teachers, early childhood, special education teachers, and gen ed teachers, I wanted them to know about how important working with parents were. You know, somebody else can teach you really how to sit down and assess, although I did that. But what I wanted them to walk away with was, don't ever disregard a parent. Always listen to a parent, because truly they know a lot more than you do. So I believe at the end of the semester, I believe that they got that. I believe they got that. So when I wrote this up months and months ago, I said, oh, we're going to talk about the IEP process. So I had to pull some slides to talk about the IEP process. IDEA, we all know IDEA, federal law makes sure that children who are identified as having a disability get a free and appropriate public education. Applies from children from birth to age 21. So those of you who have children who are under 3, you are in Part C or early access, and you may or may not be transitioning to Part B, which is 3 to 21. Have to be evaluated to make sure that you really do have some special needs, because you don't want to get into special ed unless you need it, because that's where the resources are. And so if someone doesn't need special ed, we don't want to spend our money on them, and we don't want to spend our time on them. That's a terrible thing to say. That's for gen ed. All right, so these slides are part of a presentation that will be going on this afternoon with Dee Geffman and Betsy Lynn from the Department of Education. They graciously shared these with me, just so that you have just kind of a little bit of grounding in the process. The transition from early access to Part B, or special education services in preschool, is really pretty gentle. Part C is much more gentle than Part B. So you'll still always have to sign to have permission to evaluate. You have to sign for everything. And they'll do a full evaluation, individual evaluation on your child. And then from that, the determination of eligibility occurs. So the people at the IFSP IEP team meetings determine, based on the information, based on the assessment, the review of information, any sort of interviews that they'll be doing with you or the providers, then there's a determination made as to whether they need to continue on in special education and Part B services. So that has to be done. The conversation needs to start 6 months before their 3rd birthday. And that is something that is not flexible. I mean, the state comes down really hard on early access if things are not documented as having a conversation at 30 months. And because the feds really come down on the state if that's not the case. There's a lot of requirements that there's no give, and this is one of those. The IEP, if there's one, has to be in place by the child's 3rd birthday, and has to be ready to go if that is going to occur. So an IEP is much different than an IFSP. In IFSP, we talk about what the family wants, what their outcomes are. It's a little more user-friendly because really in Part C, we're working with the family because the family is the person who sees the child the most. Lots of children are still in the home, some are in childcare, but that parent is really then, and really always, the child's first and the most important teacher. So that's what early access does, is works a lot with families to coach them so that they know how to help their children. An IEP is a little bit different than an IFSP because these are services that happen typically in a school setting. So at the team, you'll all be members of the team. You have to have the parents of a child. You have to have a general education teacher and a special education teacher. If there are any sort of services that your child will receive, like speech or OT or PT, somebody needs to be there to talk about it, and then a qualified person from the school district. Because anytime there are any funds that are going to be used, someone from the school district needs to sign off on it. And anybody else that needs to be there, if it's a school counselor, school psychologist, anyone else needs to be there, then they're there as well. An IEP has to be reviewed annually. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. But you will get notice about progress at the same time that the school district gives report cards out. So you will also get information at that time, and then annually you'll review the IEP and a new one will be developed. So at the IEP meeting, it'll describe your child's present level of performance. They'll look at academic performance, they look at functioning performance. They really want to make sure that they have a good picture of the child. A lot of that information comes from you. A lot of it comes from history. A lot of it comes from just the assessment that they've done. Have to have annual goals, and they have to be measurable. So they can't just say, oh, he's going to improve his speech. No, let's talk about how. How are we going to measure it? How are we going to know that he achieved this goal? So it talks about special education instruction and any related services. If they have speech, it talks about how many minutes they have. If there is specialized instruction, it talks about how many minutes for the special ed teacher to work with the child. Addresses any sort of additional considerations, like does the child need a one-on-one associate? Does your child need transportation? If they need transportation, what kind of needs are there? If they're a wheelchair, then we clearly need to have the little turbo bus, is what one of my students used to call it, with the lift. So any sort of, talks about the date, who's going to do it, how frequently it's going to happen, the services are going to happen, and the number of minutes. Sit there figuring out a number of minutes. It's like, wow, that's a lot of minutes a month. But it really isn't. Not enough, usually. And decide on the educational placement. Based on all of this information, where will your child's needs be best met? Not looking at, I think he would be better in Miss Jane's class, or he would be better in Mrs. Smith's class. Really looking at the placement of general education with inclusion, a self-contained classroom, a combination of both. So that's what placement is. It's not about the teacher. So where is my child going to be? That's when we talk about least restrictive environment. Oh, look at that. That was the DE thing. I don't know how to do that. Least restrictive environment, the most least restrictive environment is in a classroom with really just with the teacher or with the teacher associate, not a one-on-one, not a lot of accommodations. A lot of our kids can't do that, but that's the least restrictive environment. What we really want to look at is, what is your child's least restrictive environment? Where are they going to benefit the most? But wherever that is, if your child is in early childhood, that setting, that classroom has to follow standards. It has to follow the Iowa Quality Preschool Program standards, or it has to follow Head Start standards, which let me tell you from my view, they're very stringent, or it has to follow the standards set by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And there's an accreditation process that they go through. Your teacher has to be a licensed teacher, appropriately licensed, so you can't have a 6th grade teacher teaching a preschool classroom, period, or certainly a preschool classroom with a child with an IEP. So have to have that in place, and the Department of Education looks at that very carefully. So the flexibility of location, I think we talked a little bit about that. We need to look at the child's needs and where are those needs going to be best met. So, okay, that's the DE stuff. Go listen to Betsy and Dee, and they're both lovely and delightful, and they will give you a lot more information about the IEP process and the transition from early access to Part B. I want to prepare your superpower, because you are the ones that are going to drive this. You might not get everything you want, but we want you to know what it is that you want. So that picture that you drew, that feeling that you have about your child, you have to hold on to it. Even if it means going to an IEP meeting with a frame and putting it in the middle of the table. This is from my program. Whenever we have professional development, these pictures come out and sit on the tables, because we can never, ever forget why we're here. It's not because it's glamorous or whatever. This is why we're here. We are here for your pictures, for your hopes, your dreams, for your child. So even if you bring a picture to an IEP meeting or an IFSP meeting, that's okay. Let's remember who is in the middle of the table. It has to be the child. Okay, so you have to know your child, and you have to be prepared to share this information about your child. So you really are the expert. I remember when my daughter was born 36 years ago, her pediatrician, the weirdest man, he talked to me with closed eyes, but he said to me, I had no idea what to do with the child, he said to me, you know your child. Nobody knows your child like you do, nobody. So if you think your child is sick, if you think there's something wrong, you call me and you say, I know something is wrong. And you know, I never forgot that. When he told me that I was the expert for my child, I own it. And own it, because you are. You see your child all the time. You know how they are in every situation. So learn about your child's disability. If your child has a speech concern, if your child has autism, if your child has Down syndrome, know the facts. Don't let the school psychologist, she's not going to be a school psychologist, so she's going to be really strong on the other side. She'll be your advocate. Don't let the school psychologist be the one that holds all the answers. Do your homework. Know about your child's disability so that the school district has other things to offer you besides education. Walk in there as an equal. You know your child, know about your child's disability. Talk to your pediatrician. Find out from your pediatrician, you know, are there any meds that he needs? How is he health-wise? Talk to your pediatrician. I mean, I think about my grandson who's 5 now. I know people did eye exams on him, but it wasn't until he was 3 and my daughter was talking to the pediatrician about, oh, you know, he turns his head to do this, turns his head to do that. And then they did a vision exam on him and he's practically blind in one eye. Well, talk to your pediatrician. They know a lot of information about your child. Know your medical history. Know the results of any evaluations that have already occurred. Any other therapy your child is getting, any outside therapy. Know what happens. Know what their progress is. Know what they're working on. Help others see your child as a child, not a disability, not a behavior problem, certainly not a burden. In my classroom, there was one day I will never forget that we were having lunch and a child was vomiting and I reached and I grabbed it, and that was the same day that somebody drew their poop on the wall, and that was the same day we had to make a CPS call. But you know what? That was just the day, and I wasn't mad about catching vomit, and I wasn't mad about cleaning the walls. All right, maybe a little bit. But, you know, it just was. And I will never be mad about calling DHS, other than to make sure that they're okay. And don't you be either. Always share about your child, that golden child. Because you're the one that will allow someone to fall in love with your child. You also need to know about typical development. One of the surprises sometimes is this is normal. I mean, I remember I taught in a self-contained classroom, and this was our normal. And then I'd go out on campus and I'd be like, oh, all right, well, he's not walking on his toes. What the heck? This is a really good tool for you. This is the Iowa Early Learning Standards. You can get this online, and it talks about development. It's kind of a fun read. It talks about the standards that children from birth up until the age of 5 should meet. It talks about benchmarks, talks about things you can do at home, but it'll really give you an idea of what typical is like. I'll never forget, I had a mom that they were a military family, and her child hadn't been talking when he was very young. And the doctor said when he was about 2 or 3, don't worry, he'll talk, he's just slow. Well, when she came to us, he was 6, and he still wasn't talking. So we had to tell her that he should have been talking, because she didn't know what typical development was. And she was absolutely, absolutely devastated. I'll never forget her sitting across the table from me, crying. And, you know, That's why you got to know. You have to know what typical development looks like. And I know this sounds like a lot of stuff you need to know, but your parents, yeah, you do, because you're the expert. Okay, I want you to listen to the music. It's all about the relationship, the relationship, the relationship. Do you have all about the bass in there? Probably not. Probably not. Okay, that was my attempt to put some music into our adventure today. So when your child's in a classroom, go visit. Go visit and see what happens. Watch the interaction between the teacher and the kids. Go visit at center time. Go outside. Go to lunch. Go to speech. Go visit the classroom, because then you really can have a conversation at an IEP meeting about, well, at center time I saw that he was doing this. And I thought that really aligned with this goal that we wrote for him. But find out what the policy is about going to visit in classrooms. Don't just drop in. Find out what the policy is. I had a family once that, and it's okay to take notes. Take notes. But I had a family once that when I started at the school district, and I was a young teacher of 36, a very, very contentious relationship between this family and the school district. And so I had just started in the district, and because I worked at a special school for kids with autism before that. And they came in, the mother, the teenage daughter, and the father came in for a whole week, sat in a chair, and scripted everything I said, everything that happened in the classroom, and it was horrible. Don't do that to your teachers. Don't do that to your teachers. It was awful. I will never forget that as long as I live. And then we had an IEP meeting, and they brought their own table, and they brought medical books. It was really, really rough, and I remember it scared me as a teacher. I was afraid to work with him because they were so scary while they were in the classroom. So go in, take notes, but unless it's really, really serious and you're worried about your child's safety, be kind about it. Volunteer. Oh my gosh, teachers always need people to help them. Teachers' work is never done. They cut things out at home. Volunteer to help them. Get to know the teacher, get to know the classroom. Look at the school as not your enemy. Be cautious. Always be cautious, but don't look at them as your enemy. Try to be open and look at them as a partner for you. One of the nice things about early childhood is that for the 4-year-old preschool program and for our Head Start, we always do home visits. It is not a requirement for kids that are in a segregated classroom. So invite the teacher into your home. There are so many things that she can understand coming into your home. She can look at your child's room. Do you have a lot of furniture in your child's room? Maybe not, because maybe he wakes up in the middle of the night and things get thrown around. But that's important for her to know. It's important for her to know those aspects. The aspects of, what do you do when you go out in the community? Because they might be going out in the community. You know all the things that work. So share that with them. It's nice to share that at a home visit. Look at the teacher as your ally, because the knowledge that you have is power. So you have knowledge of your child, you have knowledge of your child's disability, and you have knowledge of typical development and exactly where your child is. With that comes power. Okay, let's talk about an IEP or an IFSP meeting. We already talked a little bit about what an IEP looks like. Let's talk about the meeting and how do you prepare. You're going to get a notice that you're going to have an IEP meeting. It should be at a time when it's agreeable to you and to the staff. And you need to know what it's about. If you get an IEP meeting notice just kind of out of the blue, nothing on there about what it says, you call, you find out. Because no surprises can happen. You need to be prepared for everything. Tell them who you're bringing. If you're bringing a friend, if you're bringing the outside speech therapist, tell them who you're bringing, because they in turn have to tell you. You can surprise them with a few people. But they have to tell you who is going to be at the meeting. and what role they will play. There should not ever be a surprise at an IEP meeting. They should not ever say, oh, by the way, we're going to change placement on your child, or we're going to add or subtract a service. You always have to know what that meeting is going to be about. And this is when you really use your superpowers. If there's an evaluation report, ask for it ahead of time. Okay, she's not here. Evaluation reports are really long and tedious, and you really have to read them carefully. You might need to ask and say, I don't quite get what this evaluation says, so can somebody help me? Look, you might have to ask for some help. So go ahead, ask for the evaluation ahead of time, because if it's done, they will give it to you. If it's not, and you go to a meeting, and they hand this evaluation to you and you want to take time to look at it, you can. Say, I'm not going to sign this yet. I need to read this. I need to understand this. Think about what kind of goals you want for your child. For an IFSP, they're going to ask you for sure. For an IEP, maybe not so much. But you are armed with information about your child. You are armed with information about your child's disability. You are armed with typical behavior, typical development, and what comes next where your child is, because this will tell you.
Is there anything like that for, like, core curriculum and what that is? Like this year at Christian IEP, all of a sudden they provide us with, she needs to work on spelling.
Yeah.
We were like,
Because they have to do that. They have to do that. The core curriculum, if you Google on the Department of Education, they have it on there and somewhere in there, and that'll be by grade level.
okay.
So yes, good job, getting your knowledge down. Yes.
So, I think you already said this earlier, but, preparing for an IEP meeting, my daughter's about to be 3,
Mm-hmm.
and so she'll be 3 in November. So obviously, I think we're right at
You are.
we have early access. Are they setting that up? Who
Yep.
sets it up?
They will set it all up. They will come and they'll start talking about transition to you, because when she turns, okay.
Meeting already, and, long story short, we're having some issues with address
Oh,
problems, but regardless of that. But, I'm a very pushy parent, I'm super
it's okay.
And I, I'm feeling like, oh my gosh, like, I want it scheduled and I want it done now. So like how, like.
Well, you don't want to get it done right now, because, no, you don't. Because the IEP, if she's going to move to an IEP, you want it to
What happens at 6 months?
at 6 months, they just start talking about it.
Gotcha.
Yeah, they start talking about it to prepare you, because you know what, she's going to turn 3. No, it's okay, because you want as close as to your child when they turn 3, you want all that information to be really current.
Very current.
Very current.
Really, the 6 month time frame is really, we're kind of getting the paperwork, the background.
You're getting the paperwork,
all that stuff.
and you're being told that when your child turns 3, you're not going to get early access services anymore. So many things that happen in special education are a result of parents lobbying and getting together and some lawsuits. So somewhere along the line, someone never told parents that when your child turns 3, something different's going to happen. So parents always have to be informed.
And then with early access, my daughter will be attending Smiles Elementary. That's the plan. They help to get you enrolled.
Yep.
It's really, they're kind of walking you
Yep.
through all of that
Yep.
until you get to the school, and then she turns 3, and then you're kind of separate.
Yes.
And then you're primarily working with the school.
You're working with the school district then. Yep, yep.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yes, and then, and if you have questions from them and you want to know exactly when are you going to meet with me, ask them. You know, good,
Not a shy person.
good.
And in those 6 months, you can go to spouse.
You can go and look at it, and yeah.
Prepared for the IEP.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just heard you say that earlier, and I was just doing the math in my head. I'm like, we're not going to have IEP meeting.
No, you're okay.
Freak out moment.
You're okay, because the burden is on them to make sure that it is done by the time that she turns 3. So when she turns 3 on her birthday, she might be walking into Smiles. But if it's a Saturday or Sunday or somewhere else, you don't know yet. But yes, the burden is on Des Moines Public Schools at this point, their early access and their Part B services. Because, and everybody knows that the AEA really is responsible for making sure all of this evaluation and everything happens, except in Des Moines, because Des Moines acts as their own AEA. They provide the early access services, and they provide all the special education services. So that's just kind of different, because it isn't like that anywhere else in the state other than Des Moines. So think about, what do you want her to work on? I mean, you think about, okay, so what will her goals be? I mean, you clearly don't know, because 6 months is a long time, especially, you know, when children are so young. But so you're going to start thinking about, what do I want her to do? You know, and knowing knowing where she is, knowing the next progression of steps for her, and you can get a lot of that in the Iowa Early Learning Standards. Think about what you want her to do. Be prepared to talk about your child's interests. Be prepared to talk about your child's strengths, and also be prepared to talk about the challenges and what you do at home. What you do at home when you have challenges. I think one of the things that schools and teachers really fail to do is to ask the parent about, wow, you know, we're seeing this behavior. What do you do? Well, you know what to do. Does it always work? No, but you know it works sometimes. And so having those conversations with the schools is really important. I had a really nice conversation with a parent, and she said that she felt that her IEP team was really partnering with her for her child. So have that mindset of you being a partner, and that the IEP team really wants your child to be successful. So have that mindset going in. Have a positive mindset, but yet you know who everybody is. And your job is to hold on to this, always. So surviving. Never, ever, ever, ever go alone. Never, never go alone. You know, I have mental pictures of sitting at IEP meetings, and here is the poor parent right here, and here we all are on the other side of the table. Don't ever go alone. And have your friend take notes, because you need to be a participant. And you can't participate if you're taking notes. At least I can't. And make sure that at the end of the meeting, you say, okay, these are the notes that we have. Let's clarify. Let's make sure that this is what we really heard. So make sure you walk out of there knowing what happened and somebody taking notes. It's like going to the doctor if you have cancer. Don't do that alone either. You always want to have somebody with you. Always. These guys, the superheroes. Ask questions. You might have to leave your comfort zone to do this, but ask questions. Education words change all the time. I was a special education teacher for about 5 years, and I went to a training with the gen ed teachers, because I usually didn't do that, and they talked about differentiation. I'm like, what's that? Oh my God, we have this big new term. I don't know what this is. Differentiation is just individualizing for children. Why did we have to give it a new fancy name and a new fancy training? So even educators, the words change. So make sure that you ask questions. I should have said to somebody, what does that mean? Well, I was embarrassed because I didn't know. Ask, because they will go on with their educational jargon, and you'll get lost. But stop and ask. Even, you know, I had meetings at the Department of Education, and one person at the Department of Education, God love him, liked to use big, big words. And he'd use these big, big words, and we'd be sitting back there. You know, we all have the same education. We're all at least have one master's degree. And so somebody will say, so what does that word mean? He just wanted to use these fancy big words, think he was smarter than everybody else. Don't play that game. Don't play that game. Ask your questions. It's okay. Remember, what happens at an IEP team meeting is that sometimes we tend to hulk up. You know, a friend that I work with at work was telling me that she was so upset about something that happened with her child. She said, I was driving and I was hulking up. I thought, oh my God, that's perfect, because that's what happens. So when you go into an IEP team meeting, they're going to mirror whatever kind of demeanor or tone you set. So you want to be able to set that tone of cooperation and be very careful not to hulk up, because then everybody hulks up. And then no one can stop and say, well, what did work before? Because no one's in their right mind. Everybody's green and big. So be very, very careful when you go into a meeting. Bring someone with you that can tap you on the leg and say, you're hulking, and then kind of bring it on down. You don't need to sign the IEP, but you do need to give permission, or you do need to say, hey, this is not okay with me, and put it in the notice, and then try and figure it out. And if you have to go to mediation and call the Department of Education, then do it. And you can ask for changes on the IEP. You can call an IEP meeting at any time. Anytime. So, talk about your observations on the progress that your child has made. Again, what works, what doesn't work, how beneficial is this situation for him, how is it not beneficial? Are we looking at all the areas of need? Does your child need to have a little more speech? Does your child need speech anymore? Is there a reflux issue? Is there a swallowing issue? These are the kind of things that you want to bring up, and maybe there's something that they have noticed as well, because they will certainly bring it up if you need to add some services. Least restrictive environment. Again, don't hug up. Let's talk about it. Talk about it clearly. What would be the advantages of my child being in a general education classroom? What would be the disadvantages? Can we look at this and maybe start for just a little bit of time? Let's take a look at it, but don't hulk up. So speaking of the teacher, no teacher goes into special education because they want to make a lot of money. It's hard work. There's a lot more education that goes along being a special education teacher than a general education teacher. My experience has been when someone is a special education teacher, it's because they have passion and they are driven to really do the best for children. And so believe that. Believe that that's why your teacher went into being a special education teacher. It's their career, not their job. Be nice to their teacher. Be nice to your teacher. If you have a problem with the teacher, go to the teacher first. Don't go to her principal. Share your stories about, in the morning, say, Dad's been out of town. He's a little off today, so that they can be prepared. And they will respond back to you. If they write you a note, answer the note. Just, at least the next couple days. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about the teacher because, I am. So, a follow-up action plan. I've got some action plan forms for you. Would you do me a favor and hand these out? Yep. So think about exactly what Becky just said. Do I need to put my stuff in writing, the things I want to talk about, put in writing, and then practice it in front of the mirror? What is your action plan? You're going to learn more about your child's disability. Are you going to make a folder for all the evaluations and all the IFSPs that have gone on in my child's life, and I'm going to do them in chronological order. I'm going to ask for a home visit, ongoing communication with the teacher. Practice how you wish you would have said something. If you said something, everybody got hulky, stop and think, wow, how could I have said that, and practice how I would have said it again.